very common problem I run into all the time with people who are generally starting out, sometimes intermediate stage, is they use the same EQ on everything. That's like using a hammer as a screwdriver. Sometimes you need a hammer, sometimes you need a screwdriver, sometimes you need a wrench. You need different things for different purposes. When we're dealing with EQ, you can't use the same EQ on everything. I had a student recently who had neutron on every single channel as their EQ. The problem with this is the visual component dominates with a plugin like that, and that makes the decisions you have to make much harder than they have to be. It also prevents you from learning what frequencies sound like, which is going to help you when you're mixing more than everything else. This is actually why people who started on gear, hands-on, with an API or a Neve console or something like that, they actually have a big leg up because they get to associate a limited set of frequency numbers with what that sounds like. So their brain starts to work in a different way than somebody who looks at the frequency spectrum as every single frequency possibility of 351, 352, 353 hertz, 354 hertz. So you shouldn't be thinking about it in that way. You need to start to associate when you hear a sound, what you like or don't like. So when you're listening to a mix, when you have something that has no, definition to it, your brain goes to the frequency for that instrument that it would probably be. You're not always exactly right, spot on, but you have a general guide in your head that says, oh, the bass needs more definition, let's boost around 1K. The reason you get to that is generally from learning what 1K sounds like, not from picking on something like a Neutron or a Pro Q3. And I love those plugins, but they're good for certain things. They're tools in your toolbox that are good mostly for being surgical and removing. Sometimes I will boost with stuff like that, but more often than not, if I'm boosting, I want a colorful, wideband EQ that has no visual so that I boost as much as necessary without being hampered by, 6 dB looks like a lot. Oh man, look at how big that curve is, 7 dB, crazy. Neutron makes it look so aggressive when you boost 6, 7 dB, and it's not. It's not aggressive at all. Sometimes you need to boost 12 dB, but on Neutron, that would look like the world was exploding. So, and there's probably ways to change the views up. I don't particularly use that plugin. I just noticed it that when we boosted 7 dB in this session where he was screen sharing, I was like, keep going. Like, why are we stopping there? Because it took up the whole screen. The point is, your eyes will distract you. They will trick you. They will get you into this habit of being very focused on what the waveform looks like on a meter and what you should do. But as we've mentioned in other videos, things don't always interact the way you expect them to interact. So you can't look at what it looks like on a PAZ to make changes, in some frequency range because it's spiking there. I never do that. What I do is if I want to boost, I go to something with a nice musical boost. That's the benefit of like an API 550B or a Neve 1073, and I'm going to show you in a session what they look like. But the point is, if I want to bring out something that's not there, I just want to pick a frequency and crank, and then I'll lower a little bit if it's too much. But I don't really want to get into exactly what it looks like and setting the cue. Every extra step your brain has to take is one that will slow you down and get you further from getting to what your initial idea was. This is the benefit of just thinking, hearing, and doing, and then moving quick enough where you really have the workflow working for you so that you don't get lost in exactly where it should be. Because I hate to break it to you, it's not relevant exactly where it should be at that given moment. If you change 6 things after, you may have to adjust that again. Whereas the concept is it needs to all work together. So the quicker you can get what you want out of something, in other words, you're not hearing enough definition on the piano, so just turn on a 550B API and crank something in the mid-range until it comes out. Crank some high end if you want more of that, hammer clicking going on. Crank some stuff up and then move on to the next thing so you can get your head out of this focused on this one specific section so deeply that you're losing the big picture. You need to maintain big picture, and the way to do that is to have the idea, do it, move on. Have the idea, do it, move on. Adjust, move on. Keep it moving. So let me show you what I'm talking about. I'll use a Pro Q3 for something like, you notice here there's like a notch out of it. If you're trying to get rid of something that stinks, move around and you'll be like, okay, and only do that if you hear it first. This is like, reminds me of a movie Searching for Bobby Fischer, great movie. Dude's playing chess and like, I don't know, I just remember the scene where he's like, don't move until you see it. The coach was like, don't move until you see it. You have to see it first. In this, you have to hear it first before you make the move. In other words, I don't want you going in looking for frequencies to then cut. I don't want you to do that. I want you to hear it first if it needs it. Because, and don't, if you start searching in your head where, what's annoying me, that's not either what I mean. I mean, it's going to come find you and you're going to be like, what is that? And then you'll be like, I got to get rid of that ringing or that pinginess or that something that's clashing with something. I got to get rid of that. Once that happens, then you look for it, not before. You don't go looking, because I hate to break it. A lot of people will just search for things and be like, look for the most annoying thing with a 30 dB boost and be like, okay, let's get rid of that. Now let's do it again. Let's find another thing and let's get rid of that. That's the opposite of how you mix. This is how people get themselves into taking away all the life and feeling out of everything they're doing, and you lose clarity by doing this. You don't gain it, because like I explained to you, if you boost 30 dB anywhere, it's all going to sound bad and funny and weird. It's just what sounds more bad, more funny, and more weird. And that's not what you want. What you want is, if you have a problem, you go searching for it and then you cut it. And if you cut things, don't go so tight Q, because the tighter the Q, the more unnatural it usually sounds when you cut things, unless there's a specific section that's getting in the way, and you just want that to removed and nothing else. But even then, experiment with widening the Q a little bit, even when you're doing surgical work. It'll make it sound more natural. All right. And you don't have to cut all of it out. See if cutting a little out helps, because the less aggressive you have to be when you're doing things like that, the better, in my experience. Okay. And only go as aggressive as you need to be. This is what I would use to be surgical and remove things that are in the way. But if I'm looking to boost a section or a zone, I'm going to go to something like an API 550B, like this. Now, the reason I go to this is because when you mix with this, it's like mixing with Lego blocks. Like, literally, if you had a console full of this, it would make sense in this block form where you're like, oh, okay, let's take the kick drum and that'll be, living at 60. So on the bass, let's go to 50 and notch out a little bit so we have room for the kick drum. And then let's go above that at, 180 or somewhere in there, 150. And let's just give the bass a little love. Or, the 500 Sting style bass boost. Let's go around there and give it, 2 or 4 dB. Let's maybe 6 dB, see what happens. The point is, it winds up working together. And on the kick drum, you may cut a little 500 out. It's like mixing with Lego blocks. It's amazing to do this kind of thing, because look at the set of numbers you have to choose from. These were not picked out of the air, for no reason. These are picked because these are the frequencies that you want to manipulate. So if you train your mind to understand what these sound like, then just by using it, you'll do that too. It's not like you need to sit there and memorize the frequencies. You need to use it in a song and be like, maybe it'll sound good with an 800 hertz boost. And then you boost at 800, and now you know what 800 sounds like. Or maybe it'll sound good and the point is, your brain will start to associate things the more you do it. If it's something's too woofy and muddled in the low end, you'll know I got to get rid of 200, 300, somewhere in that zone. I got to get rid of, is it somewhere, like if it's something you want to bring out attack of, like something, aggressive guitars, is it 3K? Is it 1K? Is it 2K? It's in this zone. You're allowed this gap, this room to be wrong when you're using something like this, because you can try frequencies that will give you different things that are broad enough apart, but only one click away, and you don't have the ability to get in the middle. That is so helpful. I can't tell you. Some people that are super scientific, mathematical minded have problems with stuff like this because they want the ability to be so specific. It's only getting in your way. It is. Just like mixing and solos getting in your way. It's not relevant to solo the track that you're trying to improve to make it sound good by itself. That's not important in the least. The only thing important is what it sounds like together. And once things exist together, it could be a very weird honky sound that works to be able to get through the other things. And if you were listening in solo, you would never choose that as a good sound. So that's why you have to really work with it all together. You need to use stuff like this, especially when you're boosting. Like if I have all the tools in the world, I got my whole toolbox, I'm not using stuff like this for surgical cuts, because you can't. Why would you? When you have stuff like a Pro Q3, or you have the Neutron plugin, like you use that for your cuts, your surgicalness. You use this to boost things in a musical manner that won't be messed up no matter what you boost. Like if you boost the wrong frequency, you'll know, so you'll make it the right frequency. And if you boost too much, you'll know, but you don't have control over the cues, so you're just left with less decisions, which gives you a better result. Like, it's just how this works. You don't need all that control when you're just trying to bring up stuff that's not there. When you think EQ, you should be thinking this: what is the resonant frequency that's the most dominant in the instrument I'm hearing? And if, for example, on a bass, it's usually the low end. If it was recorded properly and stuff, the low end is going to be the most dominant. What may not be being very dominant, if you recorded an amp mic'd or something, could be the definition and the mid-range. So when I look at something like a bass, I usually don't add frequencies to things that already have the most of that frequency. What sense does that make? To me, it makes, like, people, this is a big misconception. People think, a kick drum should have more low end, so they just put low end on it. But if the kick drum only has low end and it has no definition, you should be looking at 5K, 4K, 3K. Give it some, get it to be heard by your ear with the definition part of the spectrum, not more low end. All you're doing by bringing up the low end is bringing up more of the boom, boom, like the boom, that low thunder. Why do you want to bring that up? It's already probably the loudest thing on that instrument. Like, that thing you're dealing with. So when you think of EQ, think of it like that. If you're listening to a piano that's muddy, it could be about bringing up the mids and the highs just to get it to live, and maybe bringing down some of the lows. It's not, you have to think, what is your instrument that's going to occupy most of the low end? And then let that live in the low end. And if it's a piano, that's fine. But the point is then other things that might occupy that same spectrum have to be looked at and determine what is going to take care of this area and what isn't. I'm not a fan of exact cutting precisely out of certain things and then other certain things. I'm a fan of it all has to live together, and it doesn't always work the way you think it will. So you need to listen to it all together, but you need to approach EQ with the concept of knowing what frequencies sound like, so you can say to yourself, this needs more definition, and then know approximately where that is that you're going to boost. And do it with a colorful EQ if it's boosting. If you're cutting, go to the surgical style stuff to cut. Or if you want to just cut widely, you could use this too. What I'm saying is, why would you want to not take advantage of the benefits of stuff like a Pro Q3, a clean EQ, or a Neutron type of thing, if you were looking to use it for that specific purpose? Whereas to take a Pro Q3 and decide every time you want to boost exactly how much width you should put in the Q, so how round, and also do this. See, this is something people don't even know they could do with this. You got to mess with the slope. You notice how the slope changes, it changes everything about how that sounds on an EQ. The slope is the reason we like a 1073 or a 550B, because the frequencies mold and bend and curve when you boost certain things in a way that's so musical. It's got its own flavor going on. So as soon as I change the slope, you notice how it changes the sides? Well, that's the point. I'll use stuff like this if I want a more precise type of cut somewhere. I'll mess with slope all day on a plugin like this. And I noticed a lot of people don't even ever mess with slope, and they should. I saw Jason Joshua messing with it. I mean, people who know what they're doing clearly do, but the slope is so key. Mess with it, because and also, like I was saying, the ability to have to choose where you want, then choose the cue, it's not as intuitive for some people. Whereas, for example, if you are on a relatively higher level, that's actually why I love the SSL. because you can control the Q, but let me show you, like on my 4KB here that I use all the time, it does give you frequency numbers broken out like in a clock formation. So you can be like, okay, that's 3K right here. This is 800. This is 5K. So it gives you sort of the best of both worlds, where you can start to identify where frequencies are very quickly and easily, but also decide how wide or narrow you want the Q to be. This is so critical on why I love this plugin, because and this is also why anybody who loves SSL loves SSLs, because you really have the ability to decide where you want, like this, you know, you got your shelf, your bell style, but the point is you have so much more control, but also that awesomeness to be able to widen it out or make the Q tight really quick and easy. So you have more control over frequency than you would with a 550B or a Neve 1073. You know, I'll show you what that looks like. Also, everybody knows what it looks like, but this is just a shelf at the top. So if you want more air, you just pull this up and crank some air on it, and then you're good. Like, the less you have to think like this, the more zoomed out you can stay with your idea of not enough high end, got to put some top end on it. You crank a little of this, now you move on. Whereas if you were over here, it would take you at least more processing power. I look at this like processing power, just like it's not time wasted where you're like, it doesn't matter, I mix my own stuff, I could take longer. It's not that. It's that the more you spend focused on something else, you're losing processing power that goes into the big picture thinking. And that's where you need the processing power, is the ability to zoom out takes processing power. So you need that in your head to be like, okay, I'm zoomed out, and I'm making a change that worked or didn't, and now I'm on the next thing. I'm constantly zooming in and out. That's where all your focus should be. Not, I need top end, so I'll go here, and is it a bell, or is it a shelf, and should it be narrow, and should it be wide, and how should the slope be? All these options slow you down and make it where your final result is not as good, because you're so zoomed in now, it takes you longer to zoom out, and some people never can. They zoom so far in, it's so hard to zoom back out when you're in the early stages. So the point is, the quicker you can do that and make a change that is what you want and move on, the better you will be. So use the right tools for the job. That's the point here. There's reasons to be using stuff like 550B by API and 1073, the Neve style, because just like the 550B, you know, let me just real quick you notice you got options here. If you want a mid-range boost, you got 4.8K, 7.2K, 3.2K, 1.6. You got options, but you don't have every option. So your brain starts to associate, okay, is it the 700 boost I'm looking for, around 700 hertz? Because then you will know what 700 hertz sounds like. All you gotta do is turn this up. You don't have to listen in solo to hear that. You have to listen all together and decide what this is doing with everything in context, but you'll still know. You'll learn by doing that what 700 hertz sounds like. Whereas if you do that on a Pro Q3, you won't. You're too caught up in the exact number of 724 hertz and the exact Q. You're too caught up in all this to really get to learn what these certain frequencies sound like. That was my experience, and it helped me a lot moving to a concept of, there's sometimes maybe a visual is helpful, but most of the time my ears guide me, and things like this got my ears to be able to translate what I'm hearing to real frequencies in real time, so it's quick. Because that's how you do it. And that's how, like, it's easy for people to be like, ooh, this needs less 500, or this needs more, you know. We only know that because we're so used to using things that have these options on them. You'll get there too, I promise, if you use the right tools for the job. You can't use a screwdriver as a hammer on everything. It's not possible, all right? It'll break sooner or later. Throw something in the comments. I want to hear the way you guys work. This stuff's super helpful. That's why I still use the go-to stuff constantly on everything. EQ especially is one of these things where, you know, you want to do a lot, you use something with the colored musical style EQ. And you want to do a little, you use that Focus Pro Q3, or you use Neutron, or you use anything like that. There's no magic to these specific things. They're just clean. They're very clean. So you guys got this. Piece of cake. All right, leave it in the comments. Any questions, I'd love to answer them. And other people here on the channel, the difference makers, will come through and do their thing. And I'm sure they'll hook you up with some good answers as well. All right, like the video if you dug it. Subscribe if you haven't already. Evan Jaffe, Custom Cut Studios. See you guys soon. You guys got this.